Now, one of the things that might come to mind, a question that might come to mind when we think on this is, well, why is this happening? And what's going on? And what's driving this movement towards a one world government? Well, in the book of Isaiah, chapter 14, God allows us to look back in time. Now, I don't know how far back this happened. God doesn't tell us, but it's an event that took place a very long time ago. And if we read about this event, we'll begin to understand why all this is happening, why all this has been set in motion, and why it's going the way that it's going. But in the book of Isaiah, chapter 14, we'll look at verse 12. We'll begin at verse 12. And it says here, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning?" Now here we're beginning to read about Lucifer, who is the devil. He can appear as an angel of light, and his name means light bearer. But it says, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations?" The devil's destroying this world. He's doing everything he can to destroy mankind. But he's going to fall. His end is coming. And it says in verse 13 why he has done this. It said, "For thou hast said in thine heart," God knows what's in every heart. He knew what was in Lucifer's heart when all this began. He said, "For thou hast said in thine heart," now listen to this, "I will ascend into heaven." He said, I'm going to ascend into heaven. "I will exalt my throne above the stars of God." Now, sometimes in the scripture, the stars of God represent the saints. But anyway, whether it does or not in this case, he says, "I will exalt my throne above the stars of heaven." And the stars of God. He said, "I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north." What does that mean? That he sit in the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. Keep your place in Isaiah 14. And I'm going to look back now into the book of Psalms for a moment. In Psalm 48 and verses 1 and 2. Psalm 48 and verses 1 and 2. It says here, "Great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised in the city of our God, in the mountain of his holiness." So we read here about the city of God, the mountain of his holiness, and we think of Temple Mount. And in verse 2 it says, "Beautiful for situation, the joy of the whole earth is Mount Zion." Now we know that's talking about Jerusalem. And listen to this. It says, "Is Mount Zion on the sides of the north, the city of the great king." Now returning to the book of Isaiah in chapter 14, Isaiah chapter 14, verses 1 and 2, 12, verses 12, 13, and 14. I'll just read verse 13. "For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation." Would that not be Mount Zion? "In the sides of the north." And that's what we read in Psalms a moment ago. We know there's going to come a time when the beast is going to be in the temple of God, and he's going to show himself, or show others, show himself that he is God. He's going to convince the world that he's God. He's to be worshipped. And so again, it says this, I believe, or at least it looks forward to that day in verse 13 here, when Lucifer said, "For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High." Now right there is the explanation as to why we're seeing what we're seeing. Why this world is rushing headlong into a one world government. It's all part of the devil's plan to be worshiped as God. He wants to be God. He's doing everything he can to bring the people of the earth to worship him as God. And so when we look at the whole thing, it begins to become clear that, there is this spiritual warfare raging outside of what we can see with our natural eyes, but there's this spiritual warfare raging, and Lucifer, or Satan, is doing his best to become God. Now, we know, again, according to the scriptures, he's going to succeed for a brief period of time until Jesus returns, and Jesus is going to bring him down. But that's why we're seeing a move toward a world government. Now, how do we get from where we are now to that day when there is a world government? How do we get from here to there? Okay, well, there are a lot of things that have to happen. But we need to remember this, that Satan doesn't have the power, the knowledge, or any of the attributes of God. He is not God. But he wants to have power like God. He wants to have knowledge like God. He wants to have all the attributes of God, so he will be worshiped as God. Well, I believe that a great part of the beast power in the last days will come from technology. I do. Now, of course, there will be spiritual power, spiritual deception, but also I believe that the beast will use technology that's been developed in the last 100 years to acquire power to rule over people, to bring people under his control. Now, before we go any further, I want to say this: I'm not against technology, and I don't believe technology is evil. Technology's neither good or evil. It all depends on how it's used as to the effect that it has. And so I'm not against technology. Technology used in the right way can be a great blessing, and in many ways it is. It is a great blessing. So I'm not against technology, don't want anyone to think that I am. But technology has become so advanced, and people trust in technology so much that technology is becoming our master. Rather than being our servant, it's becoming our master. And it will be used, I believe, to bring us into a one world government, and eventually to bring the world under the control of this fourth king that we read about in the book of Daniel, the beast that we read about in the book of Revelation.